So I was just thinking about the gospel according to Saint Mark. And this gospel, one of the four evangelists, has in it a passage which is Mark 10, I believe. And it's a passage of the healing, about the healing of a blind beggar. And this passage, Mark 10, reads like this. Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. Now, there are a number of ways one can certainly read this, legitimate ways. One could look at this as a moral for how we need to regain our sight spiritually. And one could see this as an example of Jesus being able to have command over the physical laws of the world. And one can see it as Jesus being asked repeatedly to heal us. And so it's those who plead with him that are most healed. But there are a number of things that I'm thinking, what on earth is going on here when you have certain elements in this story? So one way of reading it is really as a piece of literature. That doesn't mean I discount that as an historical element or a theological element. It's just that I do literature. That's what I excel at. So I ask questions like this. Why, for instance, is this whole passage, this little vignette, set in the city of Jericho? What's the meaning of the city of Jericho? What did it mean for the Jews especially? That's what we call cultural symbolism versus natural symbolism. We have to understand what the culture thought and how they saw certain things and what meaning they gave to things. Then why is there a large crowd surrounding them? What does the large crowd symbolize? Is there a purpose for that large crowd that's surrounding him? Why, for instance, is the blind man named Bartimaeus? In fact, the text makes a point of saying he's not just Bartimaeus, that means the son of Timaeus. Well, who's Timaeus? That's a strikingly non-Jewish name. What is the Timaeus? It's a Greek name, and it refers particularly to a very important text in Greece called the Timaeus. Is there a connection between this work and the work the Timaeus? Why was this beggar sitting by the roadside begging? What does that mean? That he's inert? That he's in darkness? It's almost like he's dead. Is there a connection to other images of dead people being brought out by Christ from the grave in this? Lazarus comes to mind, certainly. Why then does he call out to Jesus and say, "Son of David," rather than calling him Jesus of Nazareth or Savior or Messiah? Why does he use that phrase, "Son of David"? Is it a parallel to what happens earlier in the text, son of Timaeus, son of David? Are they contrasted one with the other? Why do many people rebuke him when he asks for help? Who are these many that are rebuking him? And why is that just encouraging him to call out further to have mercy on him? When they call Bartimaeus, they say to him, "Courage, cheer up," right? Have courage. Why do they do that? Why is the first thing they say to him, "Have courage"? What is that supposed to indicate for us? And then why does he throw aside his cloak? The text makes that pretty specific. Why does he throw aside his cloak? What is that supposed to tell us? Then when Jesus asks him, what do you want me to do for you? He says, I want to see. I want to see. Why does he ask for that? That seems an interesting thing to be asking for. Now he's blind, it's true. But he wants to see first and foremost. And he thinks this man, Jesus, can give him that power to see again. What does it mean to see? What is spiritual blindness and spiritual seeing? What, for that matter, is, for the ancient world, the image of seeing versus blindness? Is there anything in literature that is compared to? After he asks for sight, Jesus doesn't immediately say, I give you sight. He says, go. Why does he say that? Why does he say, go your way, as it's translated sometimes? What does that mean? Is he activating the guy's free will? And only after that does he say, your faith has healed you. What does that mean? What is faith? What does it mean to have faith? And how is it that faith heals us? Then immediately he receives his sight, and notice he doesn't go his own way. He follows Jesus. Because now Jesus has become his way. Remember, Jesus has said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So is it that this man recognizes that Jesus has become the way for him? Much of what we have in English loses the sense that we get from the Greek. This text was originally written in Greek, and there are some specific things that we can look at that are important for understanding what's actually going on in the text. So some things, particularly in the text, to keep in mind or to have bearing on us that we lose in the English when we translate from Greek to English are the following. The beggar, the blind beggar, is called a tuflos proseites. Blind tuflos means not just blind, but darkened, obscured, and choked with mud. Choked with mud. That's interesting. Ekapheto, which means to be seated, is compared to the passage just before this, where the two sons of Zebedee, James and John, are actually asking to be seated in positions of power next to Christ. So you have, on the one hand, Christ coming into power, and James and John wanting to be right next to him. And then this beggar who's in a position of absolute non-power, inert, darkened, by the side of the road, pleading, seated. The two are in comparison one to the other. Most of the ancient world seemed to see religion as a question of power. And most people even saw the Messiah, Christ himself, as coming to give power to people, to free the Jews specifically from the Romans. So the passage just before is about being seated in power. This passage is about being seated in non-power, in powerlessness, darkness, beggary. Notice right after this begins the Passion of Christ. So that this little passage in Mark 10 is like a linchpin between the earlier part of the work and the later part of the work. The earlier part of the work, which has to do with power, and Jesus coming into power, and Jesus battling against the powers of the earth, and all that mundane, worldly aspect. And the second part of the Gospel of Mark, which has to do with the sacrifice of Christ as the divine sacrifice. Not power, but powerlessness. Suffering, death, even death upon a cross. When the beggar asks for something, he's asking for hina anablepso, it says in Greek, hina anablepso. What that means is, I want to recover my sight, but it also means I want to look up. And it has the connotation of I want to look in the face of this thing. So one could translate it, not just I want to recover my sight, but I want to look in the face of what's good, of this thing, of the Son, of God himself. Or you could say, I want to see God. Not just I want to see anything, but I want to see God. Hina anablepso. After the beggar has asked for his sight, Christ says to him, hipage, hipage, which is imperative. It's a command. And it doesn't just mean go, or even go your way. It has the implication of moving forwards by degrees. It has the indication of being led on by art, by artifice, by action, by movement, by creation. It also has the implication of being under a yoke, or to be brought under the power of something else. And it also implies to go slowly forwards, like after you've been healed. So he's saying on with you, but it's not go away. It's rather, I give you the power, right? To go forwards slowly, bit by bit, poco a poco, step by step, and to craft your own life. When the Lord then says, your faith has made you free, the word in Greek is pistis. Pistis. And perhaps that's the most important piece here to look at. Pistis means faith, yes, but also means trust, confidence, assurance. It means those things that give assurance to us. And in the philosophers, pistis was used to talk about an argument or a proof or a means of persuasion. If we go back for a minute to the work that's being referred to, called the Timaeus by Plato, the Timaeus has a passage that talks about the nature of persuasion. I encourage you to look it up and look up what Plato has to say in the Timaeus about the nature of faith. But if we look at this as a highly crafted piece of artwork that's actually trying to instill the power of this event, then we have to say Mark used everything at his disposal to convey that power. And consequently, he used words and images that his audience would have understood, the nuances and the implications his audience would have understood. So what does pistis mean for the Greek or for the Jew? And what does pistis specifically mean in that work by Plato called the Timaeus? I encourage you to look it up and find out, what is Plato saying about the nature of faith? If faith is a linchpin between the material world and the divine world, isn't this passage a linchpin between the material world section of Mark and the divine world section of Mark? Between the vision that religion is only power and the vision that religion is about mercy and love? The last thing is that Christ says, your faith has made you free. The word is sesoken in Greek. Sesoken comes from the word zoso, which means to save or to keep from death, to keep you alive or preserve you. It also means to remember you, to remember something, and therefore to maintain the law as well. If, for instance, something is sesoken, it is maintaining the law, and it is something that we use to talk about escaping to something like the law, the order, the structure, safety. So it's not just that your faith has saved you, it's that your pistis, your own persuasion, your argument, has brought you to a place of safety. They're just ideas, ways of looking at this text, and I hope they've been beneficial to you. If you've enjoyed this discussion of Mark 10, however brief it is, give me a like and subscribe. Thank you.